breaking, Senator Durbin. Senator Durbin, you know how terrible Senator Durbin is? Becomes first U.S. senator to call for a ceasefire in Gaza. Bernie Sanders, the progressive guru, can't say ceasefire, but this clown, this corporate clown can say it. But let's listen.
I think a lot of people listening to people in power, President, you, Secretary Blinken, calling for a humanitarian pause, are asking themselves, why is that different from a ceasefire? 2 years ago, 2021, during an escalation of violence between Israel and Gaza, you called for a ceasefire and you said you, quote, couldn't disagree more with Netanyahu's policies, quote, when it came to the treatment of Palestinians. Is a ceasefire needed now?
I think it is, at least in the context of both sides agreeing. For example, the release of those who have been kidnapped should be part of this, immediate release. That should be the beginning of it. An effort should be made to engage in conversation between the Israelis and the Palestinians. Let's face it, this has gone on for decades. Whatever the rationale from the beginning, it has now reached an intolerable level. We need to have a resolution in the Middle East that gives some promise for the future.
Have you told the president, the White House, you think it's time for a ceasefire? Because that is a word that the president is intentionally not using.
Well, believe me, what I said earlier about ceasefires under circumstances, for example, the release of those who have been kidnapped as part of it.
Now, understand, you hear that she alluded to it, saying that it seems to be the word ceasefire everybody's playing hot potato with. Nobody wants to say it. And in the video that I started with, the very boring video that I started with Ryan Grimm, it was excruciating. You heard Sam Cedar also allude to it, and he said there seems to be some sort of instructions or memo sent out to say, stay away from the word ceasefire. And now you're hearing her allude to the same thing. Let's continue with Senator Durbin, the guy who is apparently
indication this is a good faith effort on the part of the other side. But no, I've not communicated with the White House on that.
Well, they heard you now. Senator Lindsey Graham on CNN this week.
Senator Durbin is to the left of Bernie Sanders when it comes to Israel. And Brianna Joy Gray tagged Senator Bernie Sanders just in case he missed this part. Glenn Greenwald also speaks on this topic where you're noticing Democrats are coming out, and there's another segment we're going to do when Nick gets here, would come out with Harris. Democrats are all pivoting. They're all now talking about Palestinians. They're seeing the poll numbers. It's not going away. This problem with their stance with unequivocal support for Israel, without talking about the Palestinian plight, at least for the Democratic Party, not for us, that's their threshold, is a red line. And they're seeing it in the polling. And Glenn Greenwald sees this point, saw this also, this dynamic happening. And he says, this new stick of Biden and Dems suddenly fraying concern for Palestinian civilians is as transparent as it is despicable. Yes, it's so clearly transparent. Netanyahu was extremely clear from the start about the kind of massive war he intended to wage. And Biden Dems sent arms and money knowing this. And so we have this is Senator Chris Van Hollen, points out that according to the UN, about 6 times more children have been killed in Gaza in just 3 weeks than have been killed in Ukraine during the entire war. Democrats are now having to pivot and point this out. So let's watch.
Now, the siege is being accompanied by a ferocious bombing campaign. In just the first 6 days of the war, Israel dropped 6,000 bombs in the densely populated Gaza Strip. Israel has stopped reporting the number of bombs being dropped, but the intense pace has continued. Last night, my wife and I learned that someone we know well lost 2 family members and 4 of their children killed in bombing in Gaza. So they are not yet included in the most recent death toll reported by the United Nations yesterday, which says the number of dead has risen to over 8,300 people, 70% of them women and children, including 3,457 children. These
70%. 70% are women and children. So let's just say all the men are Hamas. All of them. They're not, but let's just say for the sake of this argument, this point I'm trying to make, all the men are Hamas. Is it worth it to kill out of 100 people, 30 of them are Hamas, 70 of them are women and children? You're telling me that's the trade-off that Zionists are okay with, that the Biden administration is okay with, and the Democratic Party and the United States government? On what planet is that ratio okay? And I'm granting you 30% Hamas, that's not even there. Because that other 30% is, quite frankly, males that are under 18 or males in the teens. Let's give him that, because he did say women and children. It's indefensible. This position that the Democratic Party and Joe Biden has is indefensible. This position that the Israeli lobby has is indefensible. This position that Israel has is indefensible. That's why the world is on Palestinian side. And if they don't be careful, this could tip into the absolute destruction of the state of Israel. If the other Arab nations enter this war, the U.S. cannot be in war, gearing up for war against China while at war in Ukraine. And now we're adding this in Palestine. And then we're spread out in other little satellite places like Somalia and Syria. Like we're too stretched thin. So if these other people in this region enter this fight, what do you think is going to happen to Israel? What do you think when the Arab nations that enter the fight to help the Palestinians come in and start taking territory of so-called Israel, where they believe is Palestine? What do you think is going to do with that? When Hezbollah comes up from Lebanon, from the north, when things get so bad that Turkey enters this or they send troops, this is not going to end well.
are UN figures. According to UN figures, that is about 6 times more children killed in 3 weeks in Gaza.
So now look at the Negro servant on the left. You know him as Lloyd Austin. I know him as Negro servant number 37827. Really can't stand black people that are fucking Negro servants. But I want to go back to some of the statistics that he's saying, because I did interrupt him mid statistic, and it's very important to hear it clearly.
According to UN figures, that is about 6 times more children killed in 3 weeks in Gaza than the number of children killed in Ukraine during the entire war.
6 times, I'm going to rewind it back. 6 times the amount of kids have been killed in Palestine than the amount of kids that Bernie Sanders is happily sending money to over in Ukraine. And he can't say ceasefire. What kind of person can do that? You think Bernie Sanders doesn't know 6 times the amount of kids have been killed in Palestine? You don't think he knows that? Or maybe he doesn't. Maybe he is intentionally avoiding it to save his conscience.
Or there. The executive director of UNICEF, Catherine Russell, said at the current rate, more than 420 children are being killed or injured in Gaza each day, a number, she said, which should shake us to our core. I agree.
400 plus kids at this rate will be killed in Gaza every day. Then we turn around and talk about China has a human rights problem. We are ran by a bunch of psychopaths, murderous psychopaths. You're seeing 2 of them on the screen. The one on the right is projecting like he's not one of them, but he's complicit the same. Then the Negro goon on the left, these are just despicable people. To know that number and how you don't go, right today, we're going to call for the cease. He should have been like 400 and what? Okay, we're scheduling a flight over to Israel right now, sir, and demand a ceasefire. That's what heroes look like, but they want to project like they're heroes for us.